Hello, everybody. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. This is the second time we're doing this. I'm super excited. I am Justin Lee, and with me today is not Kathy Baldock, who was here last week, but Austen Hartke, who is author of Transforming, which I have right here. I realized, Austen, too late I do not have a physical copy of your book here in my room. So okay. I do have this, which I can show if it'll... Transforming.
The PDF version. Yay.
Yes. No, this is actually, this is the ebook. This is Kindle. Kindle. Transforming, the Bible and the Lives of Transgender Christians. Austen is also creator and host of the Transgender and Christian YouTube channel, and basically guru of all things transgender and Christian.
Well.
Austen, hi.
Hi, it's nice to be here. Nice to see you, Justin.
It's good to see you. Okay, so for folks who are watching, if you watched this last week, you already know how this is going to go. Austen and I are going to chat about all things silly and serious in front of a live Facebook audience. Those of you watching live can share your comments and questions throughout. I will be monitoring them. I feel the need to add a disclaimer after last week, which was awesome. And that disclaimer is that we will not be able to get to every message. You may make a comment or ask a question, maybe even multiple times, and we might not respond to it. And if that happens, I apologize. Unless it was super mean, it is probably not intentional. The comments just go by way faster than we can get to them. And also, there's often a bit of a delay. There's just like a few seconds of delay, but enough that you may think that you put your comment in like right at the perfect time, and then I actually got it too late, right? So it's not intentional, but we want you to ask anyway because we like getting your questions and comments. And of course, after this is all done, it's going to go up on my YouTube channel.
Yay.
So Austen,
now that we've got that all out of the way.
Let's see. All right, here we go. First comment of that I'm putting up on here of the moment is Stan saying excuses, excuses.
Yeah.
Excuses, Justin. Yeah. So, all right. So, Austen, I feel, yes, I have a bit of a dilemma with this conversation, which is that I recognize that the stuff that you write and talk about is stuff that the church and the culture at large deeply, deeply needs right now. I hear just constantly from folks, including a lot of folks who feel fairly comfortable with the LGB Christian conversation, that they really have no idea how to even approach talking about trans issues. A gay Christian friend of mine said to me the other day that he feels, in his words, very ignorant. And that's kind of scary. Like, he doesn't even know, he's afraid of saying the wrong thing and whatever. So I know a lot of people have a lot of questions, and I want to give you a chance to talk about that stuff. But at the same time, like, I don't want to just talk shop the whole time, because you are more than just the trans Christian dude. So
I have so many hobbies, so many interesting hobbies. No, I don't really. I have a couple.
You have, we'll get to it. But like right off the bat, let's talk about the trans Christian stuff. Can you, and I hate even asking this because I'm sure like this is what you have to do constantly. But like there's some like 101 stuff that like we have to get out there right away before we even, start any of this conversation in terms of just terminology or whatever. What's the 101 stuff that people mess up all the time, or the big questions that like you just want to answer from the beginning?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's totally normal to be, even part of the LGBT community and not know that much about gender diversity and trans folks. I think that's like, for me, I came out as bisexual in high school, and I was part of our school, like I was part of starting our school's GSA, which at the time was Gay Straight Alliance, and now it's Gender and Sexuality Alliance in most schools. But I was, part of that, and I never even heard of trans people or like knew what they were until midway through college. So
Really?
it's not it's not weird to not have any idea. I mean, I think it's, since 2014, there's a lot more trans folks in media. And so I think it's more likely that you're going to know at least that trans people exist, even if you have no idea what that means. But it's not that weird. So don't tell your friend not to feel weird.
Okay, wait. So can I, I'm interrupting you before you get a chance to answer the question that I just asked. But so you didn't even know that there were trans people in the world before you were in college?
No, I was, I helped start my school's GSA, and everything, there just wasn't, so that this would have been, I graduated from high school in 2006. So, that was a while ago, but there was no understanding of gender or gender diversity. It was all about, sexuality and that kind of, and it wasn't, that's, I think, the main 101 thing that I always get out there is sexual diversity and sexual orientation is different from gender identity and gender diversity. Those are two separate things. I think sometimes I talk with parents who have, their kid has just come out as trans, and the parents kind of think that being trans is just gay 2.0. You get gayer and gayer and gayer, and then you become trans. And that's not how that works. Those are two separate things. And the lines intersect in lots of different ways. I'm a trans guy and I'm bisexual. So there's an intersection there, but they're two separate lines.
So when you were in college or as of right before you discovered trans people,
Mm-hmm.
did you say you already knew that you were bisexual at that point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
I came out as bi when I was 15.
Did you still, I think I know the answer to this, but did you still feel like that there was something else that was not connecting? Or did you just get recruited by,
Yeah, I got somebody their first toaster. No, I came out, I remember coming out as bisexual and feeling way more comfortable with that label rather than gay or lesbian at the time. Not only because I think that's really truly the label that best describes my sexuality, but also because it didn't say anything about my gender. If I would have identified as a lesbian, that would have said something about my own gender and the gender of the person I'm attracted to, right? And I was not going to do that because I didn't feel like I identified with the sex assigned at birth that I was given at birth. And so for me, being bi was perfect. This is a great label. It describes how I feel. And also it doesn't have to say anything about my gender. It was like a get out of jail free card when it came to that. So, yeah.
So, okay. So let's talk about that phrase, sex assigned at birth.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like a very clunky way of saying something that most people feel like we don't need a clunky way of saying it. Why do we need to say sex assigned at birth? Why does that matter?
I think the main reason it matters is because there are people who exist in the world who have a gender identity or even a sex that is different from their sex assigned at birth. So that's adding another layer of complication there. But what I mean is, the minute we're born, or usually before we're born now, because we've got ultrasounds, we're assigned a sex based on one specific thing, based on our external genitalia. And that's what doctors look at, is this one part of our body, and that's how our sex is assigned. But the problem is that sex characteristics are more than just our external genitalia. We have internal reproductive organs, we have hormone levels, we have chromosomes, we have all the way that our brain forms in response to the hormones that we have in utero. And so there are all of these different things. It's you can think of them all as different variables. And for a lot of people, all those variables line up and they end up, their internal reproductive organs, their external reproductive organs, their chromosomes, their brain chemistry, their everything they feel about themselves, that all comes along one line, and that's their gender. But for a lot of people, that's not the case. And so it's the reason it's important is because it's recognizing that there is a diversity out in the world that previously we have not recognized, and that's been to the detriment of a lot of marginalized communities.
I think that's such an important distinction. What you just said, that this is a diversity that's existed already. It's not as though a bunch of activists came along and said, let's make this more complicated. It was already complicated, but just some people were having to hide how complicated it was in their lives, as the rest of us just pretend it's not complicated.
Right. I always think about it like astronomy. Like for a long time in human history, way back, we look up at the sky at night and we see the moon, we see the stars, maybe we'll see a shooting star or a comet or something like that. That's all we see. And then we get astronomers, we get ancient Muslim astronomers and philosophers who learned about like how the universe worked way before European philosophers and astronomers did. And then eventually we get telescopes and we can look out further and we learn about black holes and we learn about, galaxies that beyond ours. We learn about, space junk flying around out there that we don't have names for. All of these things that have always existed, but it wasn't until we got the technology that we could like sort of zoom in that we could actually see them. And I feel like gender and sex is kind of the same way, where like this stuff has always existed, and it's only now that we're coming up with the language to describe those things in more accurately.
So we've got a comment from a viewer who says, "I'm listening while also seeing if you two have books in common on your shelves, because both of us have."
I know. I commented on that earlier. We both have a bookshelf background.
Yeah. Let me know if you.
We
find
probably
anything.
do. I was just looking at the one we probably both have is Tino and David Khalif's new book, Modern Kinship. We probably both have this sitting around.
I don't think I have that one on the shelf.
Well,
back here.
it just came out, so I haven't read it yet, but it's sitting here in my to read pile.
Well, I have so many books in my to read pile, and it's amazing. Like there've been so many amazing books that have come out in recent years, and I feel like I'm always behind. And,
all the time.
Yeah. And then also I have a lot of books that are not on the shelf back here. At some point I had to take books off the shelf and put them elsewhere to make room to actually put fun stuff on my shelf so they wouldn't be all just academic.
Oh yeah, my fun shelf is over there. You can't even see my fun shelf. It's got all of my like sci-fi and fantasy on it.
Oh, real? Okay, so let's talk about sci-fi and fantasy. What's on your fun shelf? Next time we have this conversation, I want to see the fun shelf.
Yeah, we should do it in front of the fun shelf for sure.
Yeah.
The fun shelf these are like really nice oak things that I got at a thrift place at one point, and the other one is just like an IKEA bookshelf. So, but all of my favorite fantasy stuff is all like swords and dragons and Knights of the Round Table and all that kind of stuff. I was so into that as a teenager and still am. So that's most of my favorite stuff.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Anything in particular?
What's on yours?
What's on mine?
Yeah.
Gosh. A lot of some board games and some Zelda stuff.
Yeah.
And
fair.
And some like Disney mugs, because I live in Orlando right next to Disney World, and
yeah,
I drink
right.
a lot of tea, and so I have a lot of like Disney World themed mugs. Today I am drinking out of Hipster Mickey.
Although that's so cute.
This I actually got at Disneyland out in California, not
nice.
Here. So,
I've never been to Disney World, but I went to Disneyland when I was 10, and that's the first time I got kicked out of a bathroom because people thought I wasn't a girl. And I was like, I mean, you're right, but nobody else knows that.
So you talk about that in your book. You
Yeah.
want to tell that story?
Yeah, well, it was just I was at Disneyland. I was 10 years old, and I had just found my favorite baseball hat, which was like this blue surfer hat. And I would wear it backwards, and I had this like fake leather jacket that was my pride and joy. I thought I was the coolest kid in middle school, and I was wearing that. And I walked into this bathroom while my siblings were on a ride with my dad, because I didn't like rides. Still don't really, but they were on a ride, and I went to the bathroom, and I walked in, and this woman was like, "Hey, you're not supposed to be in here." And I was like, "What are you talking about? This is I've always used the women's bathroom, like, because being assigned female at birth and having two sisters, and like it was not a thing that I really thought about." And this woman was like, this is not the men's bathroom. You got to go in that bathroom. And I was like, I do? I was so confused. I felt just like this wash of like shame for just sort of being wrong and not knowing it. But then also I felt really kind of like proud, like I'd pulled something off, which is a weird thing to like. That's not how I think about gender now. Like, you're not pulling anything off by being who you are, right? But it was like she had seen something that nobody else saw, and I felt kind of proud of that, even at the same time that I was like, oh, she's yelling at me, stop yelling.
That's like it's simultaneously horrifying and amazing story. Like I
Yeah.
don't know how to react to it. Like I like have this emotional roller coaster as you're. I'm like, oh no, that sounds but kind of cool
It
in
felt like an
retrospect.
emotional roller coaster. Yeah.
So okay, so we're starting to get a bunch of questions, but I feel like I kind of cut you off earlier when we were talking about 101 stuff, and I was there other 101 stuff you want to get out there before I start hitting you with the hard questions?
So let's see. We got sexual orientation, gender identity, and how we think about them as different. And I should say, like, putting this in a framework, this is a sort of white Western framework, is how we understand this sort of difference. Because in cultures that are not white Western cultures, sexuality and gender identity may be much more interconnected than they are in our society. But that's part of how we understand that gender is different in different places in the world, because we all do gender slightly differently. I think the other sort of different, or the other sort of helpful way to think about it is that there's your gender identity, which is like how you understand yourself as male or female or both or neither. But then there's also your gender expression, which is how we dress, how we do our hair, how we walk, how we talk. And in queer communities, in LGBTQ communities, we like to play with gender expression, even if we're not trans. Everybody has a gender expression, whether you're trans or not. But we like to play with that in our community. And so sometimes your gender expression can say something about who you are. Like I dress in what I think of as kind of a masculine way because that's how I want to be read in the world. But also, you might dress in a more masculine way, whatever that means, just for fun. And it doesn't mean anything about who you are deep inside, you know? So I think that's one of the things that's like hard for us to understand, is that sometimes we express our gender in a way to say something to the world, and sometimes we're just playing with it for fun. And so that's why, you know, for a long time, men who were who sort of expressed their gender in a more feminine way weren't immediately seen as trans. They were seen as gay, because we had sort of crossed those lines of gender and sexual orientation, and we didn't know which was which. So I say all this to try to explain it, and then I think I probably just made it more confusing. But it's okay if it's confusing, is sort of the bottom line. Like, this is still stuff that we're trying to figure out today.
Well, I mean, yeah. We'll need multiple conversations to work through this, and then we'll solve everything.
Yes, definitely. Just keep talking and we'll get there.
All right, let me pull up some comments here. Jackie says, Austen, thank you for all you've done to help us trans Christians feel like we can be brave enough to stand up and be visible. Excuse me, Jack. The username that came up said Jackie, but it's signed Jack. So
nice.
My apologies
That's awesome.
to Jack for
You're welcome
for that.
I feel like when you said earlier, when you said like I'm the guru of trans Christian stuff, like I'm just one of the people doing it right now. There have been a lot of people before me and a lot of other people doing it now, and I'm just one of many. So
so here's a question. Oh boy, there's so many. I just want to pull all of these up at once. So there's a question from Jennifer who wants to know, I have a hard time using plural pronouns for an individual. Is there anything else I can use other than they and them? The individual isn't schizophrenic. There's not a dual personality in there. Is there anything else I can use? So maybe we can take a step back here and talk about that for folks who are not familiar with the fact that some people use they them pronouns. Could you maybe like say a little something about that and then yeah. I'm hitting you with so much. I'm sorry.
Explain. So the thing about pronouns is, you know, sometimes I say pronouns or people are like, please remind me what that is. English was so long ago. English class was so long ago. Pronouns just being like he and him and she and her and things like that we use too. Those are your, what's it called? I'm trying to remember now. Is it direct pronouns? I forget what kind of pronouns there are. They're a specific kind. But they're the ones that we use when we're talking about somebody in the third person. And so most people use he and him or she and her, but not everybody does. So for instance, people who identify maybe as non-binary, meaning they are outside of the binary of men or women, like the two box only model of gender, might, for instance, use they and them as a sort of third-person gender-neutral pronoun for themselves individually. And there has been some pushback from people who say, like they and them, that's for a group. You're not supposed to use that for an individual. It's not grammatically correct. But the reality is that we've been using they and them for singular people for a really long time. Both Shakespeare and Chaucer used they to refer to a singular person in their writing. So this is something that we have actually been using for a long time. It's just not been common. And so I always kind of throw the Chaucer and Shakespeare out there for the English teachers of the world who are like, but I can't, because we have been using it for a long time. Beyond that,
they were
I think
initially annoyed that you didn't know your pronoun types, but now they're with you again.
Yeah. I hope so. Fingers crossed. But more important than that, if Shakespeare and Chaucer don't mean anything to you, more important than that is thinking about the fact that our language evolves over time. Every language evolves over time to better communicate ideas to other people. And the most important thing that we can communicate to somebody is, I think, who we are, because once we can communicate who we are to another person, we can be in relationship with them and they can communicate who they are to us. And so at the end of the day, it comes down to like, do I value my own ideas about our language more than I value this other person? And I don't say that in like a mean way. It's just like, it's one of those things, relationship counselors all over the world say this thing about, would you rather be right or would you rather be in relationship? Like sometimes you have to make that choice. And it matters to using the right pronoun and name for people matters because it shows that you see them and you're actually talking to them. One of the things that I remember telling my dad, he had a really hard time when I first changed my name because my birth name was one that we sort of read as female, and I thought, like I like my birth name, but it doesn't really fit because people say my birth name and look around the room, and I'm just standing right there like, that's me. I know it doesn't look like it, but it's me. So I changed my name, and my dad had a hard time with that. And eventually I had to explain to him that when he would use the wrong name or pronouns for me, it made it feel like he was talking to somebody else in the room, or like he was talking to like a cardboard cutout of me and not me, like standing behind trying to get his attention, So when we use the right name and pronouns, we're showing somebody that we're actually talking to them and not talking to our sort of fictional, imaginative version of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it makes sense to me. I'll, see what folks say in the comments here. But, it's interesting because I also, I have to admit for me, like using they and them to refer to individuals has been something that's taken it's been a learning curve. I mean,
totally.
Even after I understood why it was important, it was still really, really hard to get used to. It still sounds awkward to me at times. And one of the things that I was just thinking about as you were talking about that, about how language evolves, is that what we see as normal, or like what sounds right to us, just like intuitively seems right, and we don't realize how much it's cultural. So like I remember, and I mean this wasn't that long ago, although I'm feeling old saying this, but I remember when there were a lot of conversations happening in the culture around, well, if same-sex couples can get married, what would you call the male spouse of a man? Like, and now it just seems so obvious. We say, well, that's his husband. Even folks who don't theologically believe that marriage is meant to be between two people of the same sex are used to now saying, well, that's his husband and that's her wife. But I remember for a long time there was like, well, I mean, if a husband is the man who's married to a woman, then what's a man who's married to a man? Is that a wife? Or is that a husband? Or do we need some other term? But now we're used to it. So it's sometimes you've got to just lean into it, and then lean into the language that allows you to have that relationship, like you said, and then you get used to it eventually.
Right. And I mean, I think the thing that can help us have some compassion and grace for ourselves as we're learning is recognizing how our brains work. Because the way our brains work is we have these neural pathways, right? And the first time you say something or do something, you don't have a neural pathway. You're creating a new neural pathway in your brain. And the more you do it, the more that neural pathway is traveled, the easier it gets to be. And that's why practice helps us be better at things. And so when you don't have the neural pathway to look at somebody and think like, ah, yes, their pronouns are they and them, so that's what I'm going to use, and then you say it, it's going to sound weird coming out of your mouth. Kind of like when you say a word over and over and over and it stops sounding like a word. Like it's going to sound weird. It's going to feel weird. But the more you do it, the less weird it feels. And like I, for a long time, also had trouble remembering they and them for folks and like getting it out of my mouth and making it work. And now I don't have that problem anymore because I've done it so much. But I still have problems with other pronouns. Like there are other pronouns that like Z and here, which are sort of like newer pronouns that have been around since like the 70s and 80s as sort of gender neutral pronouns for people. And I still have a really hard time with those because I haven't done them enough because they're not as common. But the more you do it, the better, the easier it's going to get.
Robyn says, respect. If someone asks you to address them in a specific way, you should oblige out of respect, which I love that. I love that. And
yeah, like if I always say, like if somebody walked into the room and like their name tag says James, you're not going to be like, Jim, you're my new best friend, Jim. Like that's not how that works. You just call them what they want to be called.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Melanie says, I struggle not using the term guys for a group of people. I'm a work in progress, which is, it really is interesting how much of that gendered language is in our everyday speech that we don't always think about. Yeah, that's one that I like. You guys
is hard. Yeah, especially like I think like Midwesterners, like we have it bad. We use guys for everything, and like Southerners have a leg up on us because you've got y'all, and like y'all is perfect. It's like gender neutral, a group of people. It's great. So I have started using y'all myself, despite being a Minnesotan. So sometimes people will be like, "You can't do that," and I'll be like, "That's really the best word, though." But I also use folks a lot, which sounds maybe too folksy, but I think it works really well. And it's helpful when you're seeing like a group of people, like if you're in a service industry job and you don't want to assume people's gender when they're out and about, you know, saying like, thanks for coming in, folks, rather than ladies or gentlemen or whatever.
Yeah. I love folks. I like y'all too, although one of the disadvantages that we Southerners have is that if we sound too Southern, people associate that with all kinds of negative things.
It's true.
It's like, you know, it's like if you say y'all, oh well, you know, you're one of them, and it's like,
yeah,
come on, y'all.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to get to some fun stuff here in a second, but here's another question for you. I have not read Austen's book, but of course now I want to, of course, and you should, because it's great, and you can get it right now on Kindle, or you can order it and have it shipped to you, and you know, add it to my list. But how did it go with your family? Boy, I cannot talk today. How did it go with your family when you came out? That's the question.
Well, it's still a work in progress, as I think all family relationships are. When I first came out, I talked to my mom first, I think, in my family. And my parents are divorced. So I talked to my mom, and then I talked to my siblings, and then I talked to my dad because he was the one I was most nervous about. And my mom originally had kind of a weird reaction which is actually, it's a good example of like parents just sometimes saying things and not just like not thinking about it. I remember I was talking to her about being part of my LGBT group at school, and just like I was getting ready to be like, and I'm trans. And just out of nowhere, she goes, you know, I get the LGB part, but like trans people, there's something wrong with them. And I was like, oh no, I was just going to tell you. So I scrapped that idea. I was like, I'm just going to go home, try this again later.
Oh, no.
later, like when we actually talked about it, and I did say like, Mom, I want you to know this about me. Her first reaction was, first of all, she didn't even remember saying that. It was just like such a not a thing for her. And I was like, oh, it hurt, but I understand. But a lot of that just came out of like complete misinformation. She didn't know anything about trans people, and she just was like, it was just misinformation, and she didn't really know. And so she, after I came out, was like, give me a book to read so that I understand better, which was like the best of all possible ways she could have handled that. So my mom is super supportive now. She just had to read up a little bit, which is good. She was super worried about me going through any sort of medical transition. So not all trans people medically transition, meaning like taking hormones or having gender confirming surgery, but some do. And so when I was talking to her about it, she was like, oh, be careful about medical stuff because it freaks me out. So that was hard for her, but we got through it. My siblings, I have two younger sisters. They're like totally on board from the first. They were like, yeah, this makes sense. You're our brother. And my dad had a harder time with it because specifically, like, he grew up in a town of 100 people in southern Minnesota, and like gender roles are still very much intact in that culture. And so that was hard for him. But then also it was hard for him faith-wise, because for him, he came at the whole thing in the way that I think a lot of people do, which is like, are you saying that God made a mistake in making you the way you were made? And that was his big question. And that was actually what sort of spurred me into the videos and writing the book. And so I really have him to thank for that. But things are going a lot better with him now. He's using my right name and my right pronouns most of the time. So it's a work in progress.
So you say in your book that question about, do you think God made a mistake is the number one question that you get. And it's a question I hear all the time from folks whenever, I say anything about trans folks, particularly trans Christians. Some folks who are with me on the LGB stuff will say, I don't know, though. I mean, are you saying that God made a mistake? And so I hadn't thought about that being the number one question. But when I read that in your book, I was like, oh, yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. Yep. You come at this as a Christian, not just as a Christian, but as a theologian, as somebody who cares about what the Bible has to say and digs into the theology and what the Bible says about gender and what the Bible says in a lot of ways, really interesting ways, in your book and in your Bible studies. You do live YouTube Bible studies.
Yep, we're doing live Bible studies now, 2 a month. It's really fun.
It's live. This kind of live thing is nerve-wracking. Right?
It is, for sure. And especially because I'm just talking to chat. So it's just me on the camera talking to chat the whole time. And so it's like, oh, being on camera for an hour while we do that. But it's fun. It's so much fun.
That's the worst. There's a reason that you and I are having this conversation. Yep. This is easier. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I absolutely loved what you wrote in your book about how you respond to that whole, do you think God made a mistake? Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, the long and short of it is that people, like, we have this cultural understanding that God sort of this, God does everything for a reason, sort of like overall theology that we hold to. And that theology is not always helpful or good when, for instance, like when bad things happen in the world. How do we deal with that? If God does everything for a reason, how do we understand bad stuff happening, right? So it's not always super helpful theology, but it's definitely one that's part of our sort of cultural zeitgeist. And so sometimes people will say, like, do you think that God made a mistake? And what they mean is, do you think God gave you a body that was assigned female? If you're not supposed to be female, why would God have done that? That's kind of the basis of the question. And my answer is that I think, like, looking back to Psalm 139, right, and being knit together in our mother's womb and made, like, wonderfully made, part of what that means is that we are wonderfully made in our entirety when it comes to not just our bodies, but also our spirits and our minds and everything else that goes into us, right? That's all knit together. And so for me, my understanding of it is that I was made exactly the way I was supposed to be made, in that my body looked one way to my culture and my brain is different than how that culture sort of assigned me. And that was intentional because I was supposed to have this kind of experience. So for me, I think God made me trans on purpose. And that's a hard road, and it's hard. That's tricky theology for some people that are like, why would God have wished, suffering on somebody? Like, that's sort of a whole nother question. But the suffering is not something that God is doing to us. The suffering is being in a society that doesn't understand yet. And so it's more of like what you're dealing with from the culture that you're in. It's not that God is torturing you. It's that you're in a culture that believes that gender diversity sometimes doesn't exist or is lesser than in some way.
Austen, I want you to solve the problem of pain. Now.
Right? Just theodicy, just get it done, finish it up, solve everything.
Catherine says, yep, I'm not a mistake. I have made a journey. The Bible is full of journeys.
It's true.
Yeah. So a bunch of comments have been coming in. Someone was talking about the number of parents groups that exist. And what I'll do when this goes on YouTube, if I remember to, I will try to remember when this goes on my YouTube channel, in the comments, I can link folks to some of the parents groups that exist.
And I would throw into that as well. I also, one of the things that I don't often put in my bio, and I should, is that I work as the faith coordinator for an organization called Gender Spectrum. And it's a group for trans and gender diverse youth and their families. And as the faith coordinator, I lead both parents groups and youth groups talking about faith and gender. So if you want to get in touch with Gender Spectrum, you'll be able to find me there and find support for parents and youth there too.
Awesome. And we'll mention this again at the end but somebody asked, how can they be part of your Bible study? How can they be part of your Bible study, Austen?
Right now we're doing it every other Wednesday. So we just had one, whatever last Wednesday was. And then this Wednesday, I have a group that's specifically just for gender diverse folks. It's a closed group. But then the Wednesday after that, it'll be another open Bible study. And it's just on my YouTube channel. So if you go to my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Austen Lionheart, that's where all my stuff will be.
And that is Austen with an E.
With an E, like the author, not like the place in Texas.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you something that is not at all serious.
All right, I'll sit back and get comfy.
I had a different question, but then this just came in, so I have to ask. Catherine says, don't forget the pineapple on pizza question. This is because last week when I was talking with Kathy Baldock, somebody asked about pineapple on pizza. So, Austen,
I usually don't do binaries, the whole like two people splitting people into two, but like this is one that I'll get on board with.
Okay.
I am 100% a pineapple on pizza fan.
Yes.
All the time.
Yes.
I just like, my girlfriend hates it. Every time we get pizza, I'm like, pineapple though? And she's like, oh, do we have to? So yeah, no, I'm a pineapple person.
That was the right answer. Thanks for being here with the right answer.
Thanks for being on the team.
Let's see. Let me ask you something else that's not related to being trans and Christian. Although, seriously, we could talk, and I want to. You'll have to come back because I want to talk a lot about this stuff, and I want to encourage folks to go and read Austen's stuff and watch his stuff and ask him questions, because there are lots of questions that we don't have time to talk about on this thing, but I want to make sure that folks are getting answers to these questions because they're important.
Totally.
But also, you're a well-rounded person. You're not just one thing, and you are also an author, and I am an author, and I want to ask you, how was the book writing process for you?
It was I did it in a really unhealthy way, to be honest.
Really?
I had no idea what I was doing, and so when I first sort of put the proposal out there for the book and I got it picked up by my publisher, Westminster John Knox, they were like, can you have it done? I'm trying to think of what they gave me. I think the first sort of proposal was, can you have it done in 6 months? And I said, I think I can have it done in 9 months. And I needed to have said a year. I should not have said 9 months. That was not. And I think that it came about because I think the idea was like, oh, the trans thing, it's such a fad, like it's going to go out of style. We got to get the book out really quickly because like this is in the news now, like they thought it was going to go away.
No one will be trans anymore.
Exactly. Like I think that was kind of like, not to bash the nice folks at WJK, I love them, but like I think that was kind of the marketing behind it, was like, this is a hot thing, so let's get it out now. And
they
so
were
I
gay,
said,
then they became super gay, and now they're trans.
now they're just all trans. Yeah.
They're going to be just who knows what.
Who knows what. It's we're all going to be marrying our dogs next.
That's what I hear.
But so they gave me a 9-month contract, and I spent the first 3 months freaking out and not writing because I was so nervous that I was going to do it wrong. So I wrote the whole book in 6 months, even though they gave me the 9-month contract. And so what happened was I was working at a bakery, which I loved. I was working at this great bakery and baking bread. And I would go and I would bake bread every morning from about 4:30 until noon. I would come home and take like an hour-long nap and then try to work on the book from like 2 p.m. until I went to bed. And I went to bed at like 7:30 because I had to get up the next day at like 3. So it was just like this like total messed up cycle of like trying to bake to pay my rent and then trying to write the book at the same time. And it was a lot of work and it was very, very stressful. And so when I finally got the whole manuscript out, I was like, now I can relax. And so, of course, having that sort of like really stressful experience makes me super nervous about thinking about writing another book because like I want to do it. And like I have this thing and like I'm putting together a proposal, but every time I look at it, I'm like, do I really want to do this again?
Give yourself more time. See, that's the mistake I made. So when I wrote my first book, Torn, I didn't know if anybody would publish it. And so I actually wrote the whole book before approaching an agent and, then through the agent, the publisher. I'd written all of it. And that actually helped me out a lot because I had been able to take my time writing it, making sure that it was exactly what I wanted it to be. So then when I had an idea for a second book, I did what you normally do, where you, with nonfiction at least, where you pitch the proposal, the idea, as you say, and then they're like, oh yeah, we would like to publish that, so we'll give you, X amount of time. And I agreed to an amount of time that seemed like a reasonable amount of time. I think it was actually my idea. I was like, oh, I can do it in this amount of time. And then life got a lot more complicated than I expected, and everything took a lot longer than I expected. And then I was like frantically, they're like, we're waiting for the final draft. I'm like, I know, I'm working on it.
Yup. So let me think what this timeline was. My final manuscript was due the summer of, it was like June of 2017. So the 6 months that I was writing was right during the 2016 election and the fallout and the immediate aftermath of that. And I remember sitting and thinking like, I could not have chosen a worse time to like stress myself out more than I'm already stressed out about like the state of this country and the world. It was a rough time. Yeah,
but it's done. It's out there. You've got a lot of stories of other folks.
And and I'm really proud of it. Just like there are things that I wish I could change, obviously, and especially in, I think it's the second chapter that has a lot of the sort of language and gender basics. It's changing so fast that by the time it was published, I was already like, no, wait, we got to change like 2 things. Yeah. But in general, I'm still very proud of it and happy with it.
That's awesome. You sound like a perfectionist. Are you a perfectionist?
Oh, yeah.
You and me both, dude.
Yep.
So, okay, I'm going to ask you something I asked Kathy. Because I find this kind of work where you're educating folks, and it's a little different for Kathy because she's a straight cisgender woman. For you and me, we're both spending a lot of our time trying to educate folks, both to like support folks who are kind of in our own groups, but also to educate folks who are not, about people like us. I enjoy it. I'm glad to have that opportunity. I find it sometimes really stressful. Do you find it stressful? Does it get to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tension because I mean, it's sort of a inside versus outside thing, like of like inner, like facing inward versus facing outward, sort of thing, where I try to spend, a certain percentage of my time faced outward towards, cisgender folks who don't really get it, and I want to help them get it, and then turning inward to say, what can I do to support my community, and try to like figure out the balance between that inward and outward facing work. But I think both of them are stressful in different ways and sort of exhausting in different ways. I think, when you're sort of with people who already get it in some way, that can be less exhausting and less stressful. But I think it also, having the kind of power and privilege that you and I have as people who are seen as, white guys, and also who are authors, and so we have some sort of like voice in our community. There's a pressure to just, I don't know. I don't know if you feel it, but the pressure to just sort of like fix everything, which is like not healthy, and really, I'm sure not what people actually mean or like want to put on you. But there's this sense of like, oh, but I should do this, and I should do this, and I should do this for my community, and I'm just one person, and it's exhausting,
Yes, you put that very, very well. Yes. I need to, print that out somewhere and put that up on a wall, because that's hard. That's hard for, I feel it's something that I don't know that a lot of people talk about this. Well, I'm sure people talk about this, but not enough, probably as much as we should. That it's not just about some people have privilege and some people don't have privilege, but like we are in intersecting circles, and so we can have a lot of privilege in some areas and not in others. And there are people who will listen to me who wouldn't listen to you, and people who will listen to you and me who won't listen to somebody else, and people who will listen to somebody else who won't listen to either of us. And that's hard, because you can feel the tension of being not listened to, and also the pressure of needing to use whatever platform you have as well as possible. What do you do? And okay, so viewers who are watching, I want your questions, silly or serious, for the last like little bit. So I'm going to ask a question while you think about what you really want to ask Austen. What do you really want to know? Or ask both of us.
It's the only time. You'll never talk to me again. This is your only chance.
Never again. Austen will be gone. You won't know.
Leaving the internet.
Yeah. That took a darker turn than I intended. I'm not
sorry.
Anyway. No, that was all
I'll
me.
be here, I promise.
So, okay. Here's a question I want to ask while they're thinking of their better questions. How do you cope? Like, what do you do to relax when you have all that stress?
I'm still figuring it out.
What's my answer?
And the funny thing about it is that this next book that I want to write is about that. And so I'm like, how can I make the thing that I want to use to relax more work? That sounds good. I think, like, for me, the thing that makes me feel better is using my body in an active way, because my brain is always going 2 million miles an hour, and my body then holds all of that tension and stress from my brain going so fast. And so for me, I have to get it out of my body. And like, I notice a difference when I am not working out or something, when I go for a couple of like 2 or 3 days, well, 2 is fine, 3 or 4 days without doing something active, because my body just holds all this stress. So the thing that I've been doing recently is I started going to a boxing gym and learning how to box. And it's fascinating. It's like physically stimulating, obviously, because you're working really hard, but it's also like mentally and sociologically fascinating, because I'm suddenly in this arena where I'm working out with all these other guys, and like there's a lot about boxing and masculinity that kind of like is just fascinating for me to watch, and just be like, how does this work? Like, how do guys do this thing, and why do we do what we do? And so for me, a lot of it is just like getting it out of my body through boxing.
Interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. I like that.
Yeah.
I will never do that. That's not gonna But I do need to be active. That's a good idea. Okay. All right. Oh my goodness. So many questions. Okay.
Hopefully my internet isn't cutting out too much because I'm kind of cutting out on this side, but hopefully you can still see me okay.
You're good. You're
Cool.
You're good. You're good. Okay. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh, that's so hard. My first crush was Luke Skywalker, and simultaneously Princess Leia. But when I was born, my mom said I had pointed ears because she watched so much Star Trek that I was born like with Vulcan ears. So it's really a hard choice.
Okay, so is that both?
It's both. It has to be both.
Okay. All right. Okay, there's some serious ones in here, but I'm doing less serious ones first.
Okay.
Austen and Justin, what kind of animal do you want to own?
Ooh.
Your name was first, so you have to answer first.
Oh man, like that really opens it up because I was gonna say like a type of dog, but now that it's like open to all animals,
Right.
like in a fantasy world. I would like to have a friend that is an elephant.
A friend that is an elephant.
I think that would be great. Elephants are so smart and so interesting.
Oh, nice. All right, I like that.
Elephants are one of the only other animals that bury their dead in like a ritualistic manner. It's very interesting.
I did not know that.
They
Interesting. Do. For me, I don't think I have the time or whatever else I need to take care of a pet. I have had pets like when I was younger, but in a fantasy world, you know what? I love sugar gliders. They're the cutest things ever. They make not great pets unless you have a lot of time and are up all night and are willing to, like there are lots of, in some places they're illegal to own partly for that reason. Mm-hmm. But like in a fantasy world, I would totally have a sugar glider. They're so cute.
They're very cute.
For those of you who don't know what a sugar glider is, they're like the cutest variant of a flying squirrel ever. That's like what they are. Look them up. Okay. All right. Let me because time is running short. Here's a serious question. Is there anything you wish allies would not do when they're advocating for transgender individuals?
Ooh. Gosh. I think the main one is probably just like accidentally speaking for trans people. That's like a big problem where like folks that are really well-meaning and really want to help and do something end up kind of accidentally putting themselves in the spotlight and like speaking for the community in a way that's not helpful. I think like in a situation where like say you're in a church and you've got some trans folks in your church that want to, do a certain thing. They want to like start a Bible study. They want to change some of the language that's used in sermons and things like that, or they want to talk about language. They want to do something. You want to go to that group and ask them if they need help and what you can help with. But don't sort of make it your own crusade to be like, now I'm going to fix this for the trans folks, because it's like it just doesn't when people aren't allowed to speak for themselves. You can accidentally step over people's needs that you didn't know about because you're not part of that community.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to say anytime you're advocating as an ally for any group, speak up for folks, but don't speak for them.
Yeah, right. If you can find a place or a time to pass the mic, or to like if somebody at your church is like, hey, you seem to know the most about LGBT people, will you do a workshop on transgender people? You can be like, well, I'm not trans, so I probably shouldn't do that, but I will find somebody who is trans and who can. There are lots of good folks out there doing this sort of educational work.
Okay, so this is a big one. You ready? This is a big one.
I'm ready.
Okay, David wants to know. One story that people opposed to trans people like to pull out is people who have gender-affirming surgery regretting it later. How often does that happen? If it does happen, how can that become less common? And I would just add, how do you do you have any recommendations about how folks should respond to that kind of thing? Because it is something that gets pulled out a lot. I'm sure you've heard it. Like, how do you respond when folks pull that kind of thing out?
Well, the thing is, the people that do say that and point to research that backs that up are not 100% wrong in what they're saying, because what they're doing is referring to a couple of different studies that were done, I think, in Denmark and the Netherlands. I'm trying to remember. Maybe one was in Norway, in Scandinavia, anyways. A couple, like 10 years ago, maybe. And there were a couple of studies there that tried to see if there were trans folks that regretted medically transitioning. And they did find quite a few people that did. But as it turns out later, the methods of the study were not great, first of all. And second of all, the way that they had – when I say the methods, I mean not only the questions that they asked, but also the sample size and also the way that they chose the sample. And so there were things about those studies that were not great. And yet those are the studies that people sort of hold up and go, look, here's the studies that say trans people regret transitioning. What I always do is say – hey, here are the 15 studies that have been done since then that have had better methods and that have actually shown that regret for gender confirmation surgery is actually a very, very uncommon thing. So like both sort of sides of the argument are holding up like legitimate studies. It's just that one study is much, much older and not done as well as the more recent studies that seem to have been done much better, and we have many more of. So that's kind of where things are at the moment. So the reality with like the studies that we've done more recently has shown that regret is actually very, very uncommon. And part of the reason for that is that there are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through as a trans person in order to get any sort of surgery. And that, like for me personally, before I had what's called top surgery or chest reconstruction surgery. And for me, to get that surgery, I had to go to a year of counseling. I had to have 3 different letters from 3 different mental health professionals, plus my doctor. I had to pay an extraordinary amount of money. Like there are a lot of hoops that are required before you can get any sort of confirmation surgery. And so by the time you've made it through all of those, it's very unlikely that you will have not been talked out of it if it was possible to talk you out of it. Does that make sense?
So this is not something that people just do on a whim, like getting a tattoo.
No.
Speaking of which,
not at all.
Cynthia wants to know, what's the tattoo on your arm? It's pretty interesting.
I've got 2 of them, actually. I've got one right here. And this is, let's see if I can get a good shot of it where it's not all weird.
Well, so you're a little cut off. So yeah, so bring it to the middle of your screen and we should be able to see it. Yes.
How's
we
that?
can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one of them. And that's it's a tattoo of the heart chakra. So if you know anything about yoga or about how. Okay, well, essentially, it's the center of energy in your body that's right here. And I got it at a time when I was practicing a lot of yoga because it was pretty much the only thing that was connecting me to my body at a time where my gender dysphoria, that sense of the disconnect between who you are and your body, was really, really bad for me. And so yoga was one of the things that really helped me connect. And so it was kind of a reminder of that. The other one is on this arm. Let's see if you can get that there. And this is a really cool sort of block print that my brother-in-law did of a building in the square of my hometown.
Nice. You know, you talk about that gender dysphoria. One of the things I hate that we're still at a place where so often when we talk about gender identity and Christianity, we still keep coming back to this thing of like, you know, should people such and such, should people be allowed to such and such? Is it morally, you know, like we keep coming back to these very kind of this frustrating place, but it's also where we are right now in a lot of society. But one of the things that for me just answered that a long time ago to the point that that was not even a question I was asking anymore, was watching a couple of my friends who were trans as they took the steps to fully transition in their life, in the way that they presented themselves to others, in a variety of ways. And the tremendous difference it made in just their emotional, like, outlook, their ability to just do life. Like, at the end of the day, when you see somebody go from just seeming to hate themselves and hate their life and hate, just, you know, find every day to be exhausting just to drag themselves through it, to being able to, like, have joy and practice their faith with joy, to like see the light of God in their eyes again. And you know what, like, that is that's such a powerful testimony all on its own. And I'm not trans, so I don't feel like I have any right to tell anybody else, you know, anything anyway. But like, for me, that was just like watching that happen with people I cared about. It was like, what else do I need? You know, like, that's clearly, this person is doing much better than they were before.
Yeah, I once did a talk with Allison Robinson, who you probably know.
Yes.
And we talked about the sort of the gifts that trans people bring, the sort of theological gifts that we bring to Christian community. And Allison talked about how trans people bring the gift of understanding suffering. And I talked about how trans people bring the gift of understanding resurrection, and this sort of cycle of death and resurrection that exists within the life of so many trans folks as they transition and as they get to sort of come into the abundant life that we all should be able to, you know, live out, is, I think, a really powerful thing to witness.
Yeah. Well, we've been doing this for an hour now, so we should wrap up. But is there anything you want to say or talk about, other than, I'll give you a chance before we wrap up to, like, pitch your website and book and all that stuff again, but, like, anything else we should talk about or say before we wrap up?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. All right. Well, dude, thank you for being on the show. I don't really know, like, this show doesn't have a name yet. It's just it's okay. It's
still growing. It's a baby show.
It is. But it's fun, and I like having these conversations and having a chance to talk about this stuff. It gives me a great excuse to, like, hang out with cool people, and then other people get to ask questions, and it's interesting. So thank you for you know, being my second guinea pig. Kathy was my first guinea pig, and you're my second guinea pig. So
well, thanks for having me. This was really fun.
And thank you for all that you're doing. It's difficult work, and the world is better because of you. So thanks for that.
Thanks.
So,
ditto,
folks. Well, thank you. So for folks who want to get in touch with you, read your book and participate in your Bible studies and watch your videos, of which there are many, and all of that stuff, where should they go? What should they do?
Well, I suppose the easiest thing to do is going to my website, because everything is pretty much linked there. It's austenhartke.com. And, you know, Justin can show you how to spell it, I'm sure, in some description. But everything
on the
is
screen right now.
There. Yes, good. But yeah, if you go there, there's a link to the videos, the YouTube channel, and there's also a whole page of further reading resources. So if you want more books about this kind of stuff, PDFs all over the internet, people to follow on Twitter, that's all on the resource page. The Bible study, like I said, will be happening. Let me look at my calendar so I can give you the right date. The 23rd will be our next one. And it'll just be on my YouTube channel. We usually do it at 8 p.m. Central Time, so 9 p.m. Eastern. So about now, actually.
Yes.
So that'll be Wednesday the 23rd. And that'll just be on the YouTube channel. And what else haven't I said? Oh, yeah, if you want to get connected with Gender Spectrum for gender diverse youth and families, you can email me, ahartke@genderspectrum.org.
Awesome. And in case anybody is listening in on all of this and cannot see the screen, I will spell it out: AustenHartke.
That's
Is your
it.
name. .com is your website.
That's it.
And for folks who want to watch this video in its entirety, in the highest quality that I got, it's going to be up on my YouTube channel, which is, oh, wait. Let me see if I can do this. I got a thing.
Ooh.
Boom. There it is. Austen can't see it. Austen, trust me, it is there.
I trust you. It's really cool.
YouTube.com/GeekyJustin. That is my YouTube channel, and this will be up there. And we will do another one of these live things next week. Same. I should have come up with something to say, like same bat time, same bat channel.
Same bat channel, yeah.
Right. But yes, same time and place. Thank you everybody for participating, and thank you, Austen. And we'll chat soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Justin.
How are we going?